All right, guys. Our next guest is competing at Bellator 137 Halsey vs. Grove on May 25th. He has a perfect 8-0 record and is, of course, the Bellator Middleweight champion. He is none other than Brandon Bull Halsey. Brandon, welcome to Submission Radio. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
The pleasure is all ours, Brendan. Now, let's talk about you. You've had 8 fights, you've won all 8 of them, and you made your pro debut just over 3 years ago, and now you're the Bellator Middleweight champion. That's incredibly impressive. Before we talk about your upcoming fight, we want to talk about your entry into MMA. How did you first get into the sport?
I come from a wrestling background. I wrestled in college. I noticed that, wrestlers had, a dominant position in MMA, and they were, at the top of the food chain. So I decided, is either get an office job or pursue something that I was passionate about. And, working it out and being an athlete was, always a dream of mine. And being able to make a career out of it was just, the most logical choice for me.
Yeah, certainly right, Brendan. And as Casper mentioned, you're only 3 years into your pro career. How difficult was it for you to make that transition from wrestling to MMA? Was it an easy one for you? Because we've spoken to a lot of wrestlers before, and some of them have a bit of a difficult transition getting used to the striking and the other aspects of the game.
Yeah, nobody likes getting punched in the face. Wrestlers have kind of a difficulty. They go from wrestling then to getting punched, and they get in uncomfortable positions, and then they kind of, lose fights that way. They kind of get out of their element, and they get hit once, and they kind of lose focus. So being able to kind of keep your composure and kind of take the punches and roll with the punches, basically, is the name of the game. And being able to be comfortable and sit in the pocket and throw strikes is, one of the biggest things for a wrestler to do.
For sure. And a lot of people, a lot of athletes now, guys that may have gone on to other sports now are considering mixed martial arts because the sport is becoming so mainstream. Was MMA something that you watched and you were a fan of since you were young, or is it just something that you sort of fell into after wrestling?
Oh, yeah. I can remember when I was, 6 years old, watching the very first UFC with Royce Gracie winning the tournament. And it was kind of, a spectacle because, you have all these different backgrounds, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, karate, and all these guys. So it's kind of it's kind of exciting to watch. Which style is going to be the best, and kind of narrowed down to wrestling was one of the more dominant, and same with jiu-jitsu. And then I think everybody kind of looked at that and been like, okay, yeah, we could kind of dominate the sport with wrestling if we kind of become well-rounded at everything else.
Yeah, that's right. And, as Casper mentioned, it was just such a big event for all the MMA fans. Now, you fought Shonie Carter in only your second pro fight, for fans that didn't know. What was that like for you? And were you daunted going up against a guy with so many fights compared to you only fighting for the second time?
What's funny is my manager called me and told me, there's I think a week's notice for the fight, and hey, you could fight Shonie Carter next week in King of the Cage. I was like, oh, awesome, yeah, let's do it. I didn't even know who Shonie Carter was. I didn't even follow him. I just thought, yeah, I got to fight. That's cool.
Wow,
and,
that's
then told me he was a UFC veteran, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's a bonus.
What did you think when you saw his attire, his pimp attire? Did that intimidate you at all?
Yeah, it was kind of, they kind of told me a little bit about him. He's a little flashy, wear a skirt to fight, and I was like, oh, gosh, I don't want to fight a guy in a skirt. That's the last thing I need to do.
Well, like we mentioned, you're only 8 fights into your pro MMA career. When you won the middleweight championship Bellator 126, you did it against Alexander Shlemenko, who not only is one of Bellator's most feared fighters, but he's had well over 50 fights. How did it feel beating the man in only 35 seconds?
It felt good. It was, a great experience. I trained with him in the past. He used to do some of his camps out of HP Ultimate where I trained. And, we kind of had a feel for his style and kind of how the match was, going to play out. So it wasn't too big of a surprise, the way it went down. But, I think we thought it was pretty much going to go that way because, we want to exploit his kind of weaknesses, and we knew he was not that good on the ground, and he wasn't able to kind of deal with the wrestling background.
No, that's a really interesting analysis there, because I suppose up to that point, a lot of people saw him as sort of one of the best guys in the division, as Casper mentioned. So you beat Alex and you become the Bellator middleweight champion. How did your life change after that happened? Because obviously you were well known in the MMA community, but after you beat Alexander in such a dominant fashion, how did it all change for you, Brendan?
I feel like I'm just starting to blossom in my career. I'm just kind of finding my groove, and everything's falling into place. I feel like 2015 is going to be a big year for me. Looking to do some exciting things, have some exciting highlight fights, and just improve in my MMA career. Just improve my striking and all around become a better fighter. I
Sure.
want to fight the best competition, and I want to be the best pound for pound fighter in the world.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so far you're on your way there. Shlemenko, he knocked out Melvin Manhoef and called you out afterwards. The fight was a while back now, but then he tested positive for elevated testosterone levels before failing the drug test. How would you have felt about a Shlemenko rematch? And was it something that you were interested in?
Yeah, obviously he had some stuff he needed to get off his chest, and he wants to rematch. I would love to. If he feels like he slipped and had an accident, and it was a fluke, I welcome him to a rematch. Unfortunately, he tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, so I don't think we'll see that anytime this year. But I would have welcomed a rematch.
Yeah, obviously you mentioned you've trained with him and you fought him before. Were you surprised when you found out about these test results with Shlemenko?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going through his head between our fight and the Manhoff fight, but I don't know if he felt like he needed to change something up in his game, and he needed to do performance-enhancing drugs to become bigger and stronger. But obviously it was the wrong choice, and he's obviously paying for it.
Yeah, for sure. Now, the next question, I don't want you to think that it's anything related to our previous question, but one of the things that people notice when they see you is your hulking physique. And I got to ask, do you do a lot of heavy lifting in training, or are you just one of those lucky guys that's just genetically big, even if even if you're just doing heaps of cardio?
It's both. I was blessed. God gave me the genetics, and I work hard. I obviously lift weights. These muscles just didn't grow overnight, and I put in the hard work, and it's no surprise that people look at me and they question all the oh, what's he doing? A lot of these guys give MMA a bad name by using performance enhancing drugs, and I just was blessed with the genetics, and I put in the hard work, and so it kind of gives us guys that do it the old-fashioned way a bad rap.
Mm.
Yeah, certainly. Now let's talk about your fight. Your opponent, Kendall Grove, is a UFC veteran, and he's had a lot of experience on his side. What do you think are his biggest threats, and what are your advantages in this fight?
Obviously, I'm never looking past anybody. He's a UFC veteran. He's had fights, but so as a lot of the guys that I fought, Brett Cooper, Alexander Shlemenko. I'm just going to do what I normally do: is go out there and basically run through them. I'm going to use my physical abilities, my strength, my speed. I feel like I'm better technical than he is too, and quicker. And I feel like I'm going to beat him every single position that we come up against.
You've never dealt with an opponent who's had a reach like Kendall. Have you done anything specific in camp or brought in any new training partners to help deal with Kendall's reach?
Yeah, I fought a guy that's 6'6" on stilts, so it's definitely going to be a new adventure. But I'm ready to for all he's going to throw at me. I brought guys in to simulate his reach and his size, and we'll be ready for it.
Yeah, well, we actually saw you spoke to Frank Trigg about a year ago and mentioned that your coaches tailor your training and game plan to complement and make use of your wrestling. You were 6-0 at that time. How do you feel about the development of your game now? And would you be possibly looking to showcase your improved striking against Kendall this time around?
Oh yeah, every single fight I build on, trying to improve. I've had an 8-month layoff, so I've had plenty of time to work on my stand-up and my striking, and I think people are going to be surprised when I bring a new package to the table.
Sure. In that same interview, Brendan, you mentioned how you're sparring 5 days a week and just standing and banging with your partners. We understand that as a wrestler, you would want to work on improving your striking so that it catches up to the level of your wrestling. But considering where the sport is heading in regards to fighting smart, not hard, and having guys like Chris Lieben and Martin Kampmann saying they regret so many shots, taking so many shots in training, do you think it's wise to spar so often and risk taking big shots?
Oh no, it's always, you got to listen to your body. You got to listen to your injuries and not try to be a tough guy and try to push through them. Like you said, it's all about working smarter, not harder. And I try to listen to my body as much as possible. Yeah, I want to improve my stand up. Is sparring always the best option? No, technique is always gonna prevail over just going out and just punching each other all the time. So. We've been drilling. Yeah, we've been sparring too, but, we're always listening to our body and being smart about it.
Sure. You're a young guy. You're a big, strong guy. Have you ever had any scary experiences in sparring, like any serious knockdowns or knockouts or anything like that?
No. It's nothing yet. So, hopefully, I continue through my career with no accidents and training and keep healthy.
Sure.
Yeah, well, we actually had Jeremy Horn on the show I think it was a few weeks back, and he mentioned that in his whole career, and he had, I believe, over 100 fights, he didn't have one major injury. So there you go. It is possible. Now, you've mentioned that you want to fight a whole bunch of times in 2015. Obviously, Bellator doesn't put on as many frequent fight cards as the UFC does. Tell us, how many fights do you want to fight this year? And talk to the people who haven't watched Bellator, because there's a lot of listeners here in Australia. Tell us a little bit about the middleweight division. Who are some names in the division that you're excited matching up with if you do beat Kendall Grove?
The Bellator hasn't really brought too many people into the middleweight division. I'd like to see more depth at it. I mean, they're bringing more people in that light heavyweight. They just signed Phil Davis. Obviously, we got Tito Ortiz, Stephan Bonner, Kimo, Liam McGear's the new champ, Mano Newton, the former champ. So, I want Bellator to kind of bring in some people like that in the roster of middleweight. I'm always looking to challenge myself and fight the best in the world. Obviously they don't have that many cards. They kind of come back this year. The fight cards are getting more of a format of once a month. And, I'd like to fight, as much as possible that my body will allow me to. I don't want to fight so often that I'm, in there all the time and my body's trying to recover. But, 3 to 4 times is, kind of that number that I like to shoot for fights in a year.
Yeah, certainly right. Phil Davis, obviously a big name added to the Bellator roster. Obviously, like you mentioned, not that many people in middleweight. Do you see yourself possibly doing a catchweight fight with Phil if you do run out of opponents? Because that would be a big fight for all the Bellator fans out there as well.
Yeah. I'm always looking to challenge myself. Like I said, I want to be the best pound-for-pound fighter, and fighting the best in the world is, fighting a top 10 guy like that will, definitely shoot me into, the higher level opponents. And I welcome that fight, and, I'm just looking to stuff in the future.
Sure. Now, on the other side of the coin, Dana White was fairly recently asked about possibly buying out Bellator, and he said that there wasn't a single guy or contract he would be interested in. Being that you're the champion, young and undefeated, we automatically thought of you. Do you see yourself ever going to the UFC and ever testing yourself in their middleweight division?
Yeah, obviously I got to be smart about my career, and, whatever opportunities present itself in the future, I'm going to do what's best for me. And, that's obviously crossed my mind, and that would be an option.
Absolutely. Now, we're going to play a fun little game with you, Brandon, to finish off the interview. It's called the Submission Radio Tap Out Round. Hey, you've heard about this before, have you?
I haven't heard about it, but I'm always up for new things.
Okay, wonderful. Well, GQ says it's the sexiest MMA segment in radio as sourced by us. Basically, we throw some fun questions at you, and we want you to answer sort of with the first thing that comes to mind, okay?
All right, sounds good.
All right, here we go. The weirdest place you've worn the Bellator belt thus far?
The bathroom.
Ooh.
Yeah, you like us. We would do that kind of stuff. We'd wake up in the morning, and first thing we'd do is put the belt on. Nothing else, just the belt. Now, what were the first words out of your parents' mouth when you told them that you wanted to be a professional fighter?
You better not lose.
Name one middleweight outside Bellator who you'd love to match up with.
Chris Weidman.
What would Brendan be doing now if he wasn't a fighter?
Probably stuck in a corporate office.
Now tell us, as a married man, Brendan, give us one tip. What's a good tip to a successful marriage for all the listeners out there?
Being a good listener, listening to your wife.
Yeah. It's like I like Homer Simpson's method where he buys those glasses that have the eyes on them and they're open, and then he can just go to sleep.
Yeah. Whatever she says is right.
Yeah, just nod, just grit your teeth, and yep, sure. Ever try to get out of doing work around the house, Brandon, by saying, "Hey, I'm the Bellator Middleweight champion. You do it."
Yeah. That doesn't work in the house. May work outside, but not in the house. I'm still the husband.
Brendan, can you share any funny or crazy stories from your time wrestling at Cal State?
Oh man, there's a bag full of those.
We'll just take the craziest one. We don't mind.
I'd say the craziest one is when we've wrestled in northern Colorado. It's up in the Rockies where it gets really cold, and we're actually traveling from the meet, and we actually got caught in the snowstorm and spun out on the side of the road, and actually got stuck in a snowstorm, and the van, I think we got about 4 feet of snow that covered up against the van before I think the AAA car came about 5 hours later. So we were stuck out there in the snow, not knowing if we were going to get out alive or not. So that's kind of a scary moment in our life.
Wow.
Describe Scott Coker in one word.
Interesting.
Give us your thoughts on Rampage leaving Bellator for UFC, even though he was still in contract with Bellator.
How do I feel about that?
Yeah, sort of describe it in a couple of words.
A man's got to do what a man's got to do. I mean, it feels like that's what's best for him. Then hats off to him.
Yeah, true. Finally, Brendan, the most important prediction: how are you beating Kendall Grove at Bellator 137? What is the official prediction?
It's gonna get stopped early. That's all I can say.
All right, there you go. Another early night for Brendan Halsey. Don't forget, guys, to watch the fight. Brendan fights Kendall Grove at Bellator 137 on the 15th of May. Due to the time difference, it's, of course, going to be the 16th of May here in Australia. And, of course, follow Brendan on Twitter at Brendan Bull Halsey. Brendan, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Thanks for doing the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It was a pleasure.